Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. This is your channel for photography, for wildlife, and for wildlife photography. And I got something a little different for you today. You will notice if you followed my channel, I'm not in my normal studio. I'm actually in my basement. I'm going to take you over here. We're going to talk about my macro setup today. As I prepare to do some other videos around macro photography, I think you're really going to enjoy this one. I'm going to show you all my gear and gadgets and what is all this mess going on over here. Stay tuned. I'll tell you all about it right after this. Now today, team, the video is going to be a little bit different than some of my normal videos. We're going to take you behind the scenes, like truly behind the scenes. I'm down in my basement. In fact, you could see where I'm at down here. I've devoted a little corner of my basement here next to my studio, and this is where I do my macro photography. Over the last couple years, I've become just really interested in macro photography. And while I wouldn't consider myself an expert or a professional, I do think I've gained a lot of understanding over the years. And in that process, I've also accumulated some stuff, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm doing a video, by the way. I've been doing these comparison videos on Olympus systems and the Micro Four Thirds, the OM systems versus Nikon. I got my hands on this 90mm macro lens and this OM body. I've been testing this with some surprisingly good results. Stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel before I forget to tell you, because if you like my style, which is the practical style, side-by-side comparisons, I show you exactly what it is. I try not to get too bogged down into specifications, understanding that what practically matters is most important, and that's what my channel is. So as the practical wildlife photographer, I'm going to show you some of the things that I use every day and their practical applications. I was going to do this in one video when I did the OM comparison video, but it was just too much information. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with the setup, and then in the next follow-up video, I'll actually be comparing that OM system and their macro photography compared to an Olympus full frame setup, and we'll look at some of those differences. By the way, found some very interesting things when doing this, things that I did not expect. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk about that. Now I'm going to break down this setup. I'm going to start with how I mount my camera. We'll talk a little bit about light sources and flashing, and then we'll talk about some of these accessories, just what practically works really well. This is my indoor setup. I do a lot of macro photography in the field. In fact, that's really what my preference is to do it outside in its natural environments. But every now and then, especially when testing equipment, I like to bring things inside so I have a much better control over the environment. Some things also require very stable structure. So I can't have wind, I can't have movement. So in that case, I need to have something a little bit more controlled. Let's just start with one of the basic things, which is how do you hold this? Now, I will tell you, I've got a very solid table behind me, and separate from that, down here, I have a separate stand. So where I put my camera is separated from the table. Why? When I had it all together, there were times when I would touch the table and it would be enough to move the subject. So by breaking that into two parts, whether it's a tripod or a stand, I'll show you my setup here. I just find that to be very, very helpful. So let me break out this little quick feature on how I set this up. Now I've got two parts to this. There's a plate at the bottom. I found a very inexpensive plate that I really, really liked. So I'll link all of this in the bottom. I'm not going to show it to you in the video, but I'll link it in the bottom. I'll call this the base plate. Not very expensive, but it allowed me to put a head on here, and it was sturdy enough that I could put it down and it stays secure. The heads that I use, a lot of people, you may just use your standard ball head, but I'm going to tell you there's a huge advantage in using these three-way heads. Sometimes they're called gear heads. Mine is from Leofoto. I'll put a link to one of theirs down there because they've got a few. I'm going to list just the one that's the cheapest, because depending where you're at in your journey, when you're starting out, you're going to find this very, very helpful. You may not want to commit a ton of money to it. This is going to run you between $100 and $1,000, but $200, you could start to get something that works pretty well. I just want you to notice it moves on three axes. You can see that slight movement up and down. It's going to go left and right. It's going to kind of like tilt a little bit, and then of course it pans. On top of that, I've got one of the most critical pieces that you're going to use for macro photography. I'm going to pull this out so you can see it. And this is just a rail. And I'll mount my camera here, and the rail will allow me, I'll put it over here, to slowly, you can see it turning. It's moving so slow you probably can't even tell that it's moving. It's like on a track, so it's just going back and forth. I don't care what you use. The brand I use is by NISI, N-I-S-I. You can use any brand you want. I will try to remember to tell you what I bought and what was gifted to me. I bought this one, I know that for sure. I think the Leo Photo they gifted me because I have a really good relationship with them. I'll try not to forget that. You know I disclose everything. I'll try not to forget that, but if I forget, I apologize in advance. This is a big deal. This is going to allow you to focus slightly forward or slightly back. If you're manually focusing your lenses, you have two options. One, you can move the focus ring. You could do it electronically, so there are some devices that allow you to do that without touching the ring, or you can use a rail. There's some advantages and disadvantages to each when it comes to depth of field and stacking photos, but the primary advantage to this is that you don't touch the camera itself. That said, I have noticed you can create movement even when touching this. And depending on how sensitive the subject is and how many frames you're gonna stack and how much you need it to line up, that could matter. My next investment, I can tell you this already because I've been looking at them, is an electronic one. They make electronic rails that you program and it will move at increments automatically. It's designed not to create camera movement, and it's really, really interesting to me. That'll be added into my repertoire next year when I can get more established in this. But anyway, these focusing rails are really, really important. I would say if you can swing this, if you're into this more detailed macro work, then that is something to consider. So now I've got that's my stand and setup. I would then mount my camera on top there. The next thing I like to consider is how am I gonna hold the subject? So I'm gonna pan this over a little bit, and I just use this very simple tool. I bought this, one of the first things I bought was just a clamp. This is a jeweler's clamp. So this is what they would use to, work on jewelry. It's very solid. The base is heavy enough so that things don't move. Any clamping system you wanna use is fine. This is a very inexpensive option for me, and it's also very small. If I needed to take it outside, I could just throw this in a bag and take it with me, and I could work out in the field with it. I could hold a branch still if it was something on the ground. I could hold a branch still or a blade of grass. I could hold that still, or I could put a small perch into that. So whether it's on the insect in most cases is on like a little leaf or a flower, I could put that stalk on here and I could hold that while I photograph out in the field. You need a clamp of some sort. I'm not going to say this is the greatest one. There's a lot of options out there. This is what I use. So this video is all about just the things that I use. Now we're going to talk a little bit about lighting, because with macro photography in general, we not always, sometimes we use natural light, but we're often using the assistance of flashes. There's a couple pieces of lighting that I want to talk about. Personally, I always use a diffuser. I've got some soft boxes that I can bring out here, but I always have a diffused light source. So this is made by AK Diffuser, a wonderful company. And I love it's just a small company, love the people there. Great service. There are other brands very similar, but this is the one I've always endorsed them. I put this on my flash. Typically, it's right on my camera and I'm just front flashing it. However, there are times that I want to move this around to get different angles. And I will occasionally use what's called a ring light. So this has light sources in the front. This would mount to the front of my camera. I would try to diffuse that light coming out. And then I could use my flash as a secondary source of light. And you could see flash setups with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 flashes. I mean, there are some very elaborate setups. But we're talking about kind of like bare bones, basic setups that will work for you if you start to build this little studio for yourself. A couple other things about this. I do have off-camera flash usage, so this is an inexpensive option. It's just going to connect to your camera and then reach out to your flash wherever you decide to put it. And I have several of these. I can't show them all to you. Dozens of companies are making these. I'm going to show you a company called NEEWER, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. They carry hundreds of these various clamp arms. So all sorts of arms that you can buy to aid yourself in this process. I'm not going to list a specific one for this video because there's just so many options and you may already have something. But any way to get off-camera flash. You can do it with wired, or you can do it with a remote triggered setup. So you could have a remote attached to your camera and it could trigger the flash. There are what's called masters and slaves. So I could set up 2 flashes. One could be the master flash. I could set up the second flash to go off at the same time with the same exposure settings, and I could do it that way. So there's a lot of different setups. I will tell you with flash, this is one that you just will play around with on your own. You're gonna figure out what works for you, play around with angles. Certain things work well, but I tell you, by default, I am often just right on camera, front flashing it with a diffuser, and if I've got a good diffuser, I get a very nice result from that, but not all the time. Another light source I want to talk about. So you can see I've got a couple of these little guys. I got one up there actually illuminating this video, a very inexpensive light source. I could throw that on one of these little heads here and put it close to my subject. The one I generally use is actually right here. You can see my hand getting lit from it. That one, these aren't really expensive. These are LED panels. There's a lot of different configurations. Again, if I pan over here, you'll see I've got this on a tripod, like one of those little mini tripods. I often set it up on a bracket that I'm gonna show you in a minute. So LED panels, why? Like I've got a flash, I don't need this light. You kind of do. In this room, I don't have a light source that's really illuminating my subject. So what I'll often find is when I put my camera down to look at the work, it's very detailed and I need to see exactly what's going on. If the area is a little darker, I can't get a good preview of what I'm doing. If I can get that light source right on that subject, it helps illuminate and it shows me what I'm doing. It really helps with focusing for me. Again, down in the comments, you can let me know. This is something you do, this isn't something you worry about. If I was recommending it to people, I would say these are not very expensive and they recharge themselves. You can hook it up to a power source that I'm about to show you. It's a pretty easy investment. They're often on sale. That company, I'm gonna mention this company a couple times in this video, that NEEWER company, but they just sell so many accessories and I've had pretty good luck with them. Speaking of NEEWER and speaking of power, I wanna spend a little bit more time on this one. I'm a little bit of a gadget guy. I like things that are well made. I like construction. I watch woodworking videos. I love to watch people just make stuff and machine stuff and fabricate stuff. So I have an appreciation for well-made things. And to that point, I want to actually show you this. This product, and I'll show you a close-up of it over here, has a lot of different applications. Similar to a power bank you may use to charge your iPhone, and this certainly could do that. Much more powerful. And it's on a V-mount system. And V-mount is a standardized kind of system used by a lot of photographers. It'll clip on, you can put it on different accessories, and I'll show you a picture of just some ideas, and this is from the company. This one's very, very powerful. It has USB-A output, USB-C output, it's got an 8-volt output, a 12-volt output, and it's got a D-tap output. That's used by photographers, but I mean, it's got every output you can think of, and it will power certain devices right on its own. So you actually just clip it in and it's gonna power that device. These are pretty common. As more and more people are doing video, you're gonna find people using these power sources more and more often because it requires power. Sometimes you've gotta power a strobe or a flash or something like that. So these are becoming pretty popular. Why I like this V-mount is I can add some accessory V-mount mounting options. So I could put it on a tripod. I don't really use it on a monopod. I could put it on a bracket back here. And then as I move it from place to place, I can clip it in. This one I find to be very, very well made, by the way. So I would actually endorse this and recommend it and say, like, if you have a chance, click the link down below, take a look at this. It can also serve, and what I've been using this for sometimes if I travel, I've got some pretty good power banks, but this one's pretty powerful. I can get several charges on my iPhone. I think I timed it out one time. I think I got like 5 full charges on one iPhone from that. So from like 20% to 90%, 5 times, maybe even more than that. It's pretty good. So a lot of stuff happening in that little power center. So we talked about where we put the camera. We talked about where we put the subject. We talked a little bit about lighting the subject. And I mentioned a few of the companies that I've used. I'm gonna show you a couple accessories that I got my hands on recently that I actually really, really like. So I'm gonna pan this over a little bit and show you, and I hope it comes through, but there's a big bracket back here. So when I reached out to NEEWER, about some ideas for power sourcing. They said, hey, here's what I've got. I'm doing a video on macro. What might work? But what I really was interested in personally was, do you have anything like a backdrop? Because I find myself trying to create backgrounds for some of this photography. So I'm going to show you two things that I've got here. I want you to notice that big frame. Now this is really geared for product photography. There's some mounting options that are up here. And I know it's going to be a little bit difficult to show you in the video, so I'll put a picture up here of this exact product. It's pretty big. It's bigger than I thought. If you're doing product photography or macro photography, this could be something to look at. It provides a frame. You need a table that's going to be at least 3 feet wide, but it provides a nice frame for me to do other things to it. So I can put brackets on that. I mentioned these light sources. Sometimes I'll mount them directly onto that frame. The other thing it allows me to do, and I'm going to pull this down real quick, is put some backgrounds up back there. AK Diffuser, by the way, they sent me these a while ago, but these are little backgrounds. I've got like 20 of them. Some are colored, some are solid colors. I just find this to create some interest in the background. Sometimes I'll drape a cloth, like a colored cloth over that. I think I've even got a little green one. Where is it? It's over there somewhere. There's a little green piece of cloth hanging back there. So that's, kind of a background that I will use sometimes. So when I'm doing all this, I can adjust a lot of flexibility. The table is often messy. There's a lot of stuff that goes on here. I keep my macro lenses on here, my internal macro lenses, or my inside macro lenses. I've got the ultra macro and the 180. The 180, by the way, I did a review on this. I'll put a link to the thumbnail over there. That 180 is a really, really nice lens. I use that inside and outside. It's a little tougher to use outside. It's got a very narrow depth of field, so sometimes I'll come inside and play around with that one. And then I've got a Leica ultra macro, which I've always enjoyed that lens. I'm looking around. Yeah, I covered a lot of stuff in this video. I'm going to list some of the things to consider. When you're doing macro, there's a couple styles. One style is to be very natural with the way that is. When I started this, I emulated my bird photography. So I was shooting out in the field all the time. I was shooting a narrower depth of field, and I was using available light sources, and I liked that. Then I noticed there are some drawbacks to that. And one of the drawbacks is to get the light, to get the available light, the pretty light, I often needed to be wide open, f2.8 or f4. And then I realized the depth of field was a real struggle. Now I've done videos about a lot of this. Depth of field, diffraction is another component that works into macro photography. So you can go down into my playlist and you can poke around in there. You'll find some good videos on macro photography. Again, I never considered myself to be an expert. I think to be an expert for me, when somebody considers himself a bird photographer, I'm like, you've only been doing it for a year or two? Like, it took me 5 years before I tell anybody I even thought I was good at bird photography. Probably 10 years or 8 years in, I started to feel like, okay, I'm getting the hang of this. I'm getting pretty good at what I do. Macro photography for me, I'm in my 4th year of being pretty serious about it, but the last year is really when I got the most serious and have done a lot more work. There's a ton of setups. There's a ton of things that you can do with this. I've seen setups that range from, $100, and I've probably seen setups that range up to $10,000 just for the studio equipment. It is a fun do-it-yourself project. I'll tell you that. I love do-it-yourself projects, and I love to tinker and play around. These are things, as I take my photography, this is the stuff I'm using right now. Could be a little bit different next year. I mentioned some rails, how I would really like a motorized rail to make it a little bit easier. That's going to come more into play when you start stacking photos. There's a lot of different styles of macro photography. There's this hyper detailed. I'll show you some examples that I've done. This is not my style, but I'm going to show you a couple that I've done. This is an example of like a more hyper detailed, probably like 20 or 30 frames in here stacked together. Not what I like the most. Then I've got some what I would consider like more natural feeling. And this emulates my style of bird photography, where a little more scenic. I'm trying to capture a little bit of environment, maybe focus on composition a little bit more. That style resonates with me. So some of these styles I am doing outside, but there are times when I almost have to come inside to do what I want to do or to work with a subject the way I want to work with it, whether it's flowers or insects. So That's my video for you today. I hope you like this one. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to put links to everything down below, guys. So if you're interested in any of this, click around and play around. Make sure, if you're doing this, you're considering how you're going to hold the camera, how you're going to hold the subject. Doesn't have to be expensive for that one. And then think about flash and diffusion. If you're doing this indoor, I can't think of a time when you wouldn't be using a flash inside. If you're doing video or you want some assistance, these LED light panels are really, really helpful. And when I'm doing video, since I'm not using a flash, I will often take this LED light. I do some insect videos, and I'll put it right down on this holder and try to get some of that light from the LED right onto the subject, so I can shoot video and maybe stop it down to get a little bit of depth of field to show that insect or that critter moving around. I don't think I missed anything. I think I got it all in this one for you. Down in the comments, let me know. Did you find this helpful? Would you like more videos like this? A little bit behind the scenes. I do some of this on my Patreon channel where I show my setups and how I work. Most of the time that's out in the field. So if you're curious about that, especially if you're a bird photographer, I would say go check out my Patreon site. I think you'll find that really, really interesting. Down in the comments, let me know what you think of this one. And do you have any recommendations? I know there are people out there watching this that are more experienced than I am with macro photography. And I would love to hear your opinions on it. I love to learn from others and what they're doing and what they've tried and what worked and what didn't. Maybe some brands that you've worked. So check the comments down below here. Whenever I get a great comment that I think is helpful to the audience, I try to pin it to the top so you can look down there and see if anything's pinned. And that's what I got for you today. Thanks for tuning into this one. Stay tuned for my Olympus comparison macro video. You're gonna love that one. And as always, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.